The day I realized I'd been betrayed, I stood in the conference room in front of the whole team, listening to my boss present the strategy I had spent the last 3 months building. At one point, he began reading my exact phrases out loud, my wording, my calculations, my forecasts, and never once mentioned my name. When one of the directors asked a clarifying question about the forecasting model, he looked directly at me, as if testing whether I would dare speak up, then answered as though the whole thing was his personal creation. In that instant, I didn't just feel anger. I felt a physical sensation, as if I had been erased from my own work. It wasn't the first humiliation, but that was the exact moment I finally understood. This wasn't random. It wasn't just a demanding management style. This was deliberate, systematic destruction of my professional identity. I'm a manager in a large American company. When they hired me, they told me straight. My task was to turn around a struggling direction, optimize processes, build solid metrics, and drag the team out of stagnation. I arrived with a clear plan, numbers, market insight. In the first months, I really saw results. Key indicators climbed, turnover dropped. People started working more calmly because they finally had understandable processes. But 6 months later, a new department head joined. And that's when everything slowly began to shift. At first, almost imperceptibly, then more and more openly and aggressively. It started small, public jabs during all-hands meetings, remarks that my department was not quite there yet, sarcastic comments that my ideas were too academic for the real world. At first, I saw it as him establishing authority, a test of toughness. I tried to stay constructive, asked for feedback, offered more reports, detailed plans even further. But the more I tried, the harder the pressure became. He interrupted me mid-sentence, suddenly changed topics, sighed theatrically while I presented data. After meetings, he sent emails listing critical gaps that were usually just his personal preferences. Over time, I noticed he was systematically isolating me from key discussions. I stopped getting invites to meetings where decisions about my own area were made. Later, I'd just received finished instructions that contradicted what we had previously agreed. When I asked why I hadn't been included, it was always spontaneous meeting, nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, he began talking directly to my team members, bypassing me, assigning tasks that didn't fit the overall plan, then blaming me for poor coordination. I could feel control over my own department slipping away. That hurt most of all, because I always believed a manager's real power comes from team trust and transparent processes. Now my people received conflicting signals, didn't know whose priorities counted more, and naturally started looking toward the person higher up the chain. Several team members began avoiding direct talks with me. Some started forwarding his emails to me only after they had already agreed to new tasks. I watched my authority quietly erode, yet formally. Not one KPI had failed. The peak came during that presentation. I had sent him the final document a week earlier for review and possible edits. He replied curtly, "Looks acceptable." I assumed I would present it myself, but that morning in the calendar I saw the meeting labeled Leadership Session. My name on the invite list, but not as presenter. I told myself it was probably a glitch and prepared anyway. When the meeting began, he immediately took the floor and started describing the transformation of the direction as if it were his personal initiative. He showed my slides, only the title page changed, saying, "I decided, I initiated, I implemented." At one moment, I caught the eye of a colleague who knew the project was mine. In his look, there was understanding, but no support. I stood there realizing, if I interrupt now and say, "This is my work," I look like someone arguing with his boss in front of senior leadership. If I stay silent, I lock in his right to claim my results. I chose silence, because more than pride was at stake. My position's stability was too. But when the meeting ended and the director thanked him for strong leadership, something inside me finally broke. That was when I understood. This wasn't tough management or personality differences. This was a calculated strategy to displace me. That same evening came an email asking me to prepare a corrective action plan for my department because, he said, results had been achieved despite process deficiencies, meaning even success would be twisted into proof of my incompetence. I sat staring at the screen, realizing I was trapped in a setup where every achievement could be rewritten and every mistake blown into a critical failure. For the first time, I stopped thinking how to become a better manager and started thinking how to survive. That realization became the point of no return. I understood that continuing to play honest competition would mean losing, because the game against me followed completely different rules, where narrative control matters more than actual results. The old me, the one who believed facts and numbers protect you, vanished. Someone colder, more watchful, and perhaps ready to do things I previously wouldn't allow myself to do began taking shape. After that presentation, I still tried to convince myself it was a one-off, that maybe he just wanted to strengthen his position in front of leadership and would let me work normally afterward. But within a week, it became obvious this was only the beginning. He started methodically rewriting the history of my department, subtly, almost invisibly, so that in every email, every report, every discussion, the phrase appeared. The direction is under his personal oversight due to management risks. That meant formally I was still the manager, but in reality I no longer owned the situation, and every move I made could be interpreted as confirmation that I needed top-down control. He began calling my team members for one-on-ones without me, then retelling their words in distorted form, claiming the team feels pressure and experiences instability, even though we had discussed plans calmly and no one had voiced complaints before. When I carefully asked people if anything was wrong, they answered evasively, as if afraid to say too much. I felt the distance between me and them growing, a distance I hadn't created. He assigned tasks directly, then accused me of lacking transparency because I supposedly didn't control processes. It was a perfect trap. If I intervene, I'm a micromanager. If I don't, I'm a weak leader. At the same time, support from HR began, which in reality was formalized pressure. I was assigned mandatory leadership coaching, reports on team climate, extra meetings to discuss my management style. Everything was framed as care for my development, but every session included phrases like, "Leadership is concerned," and "You should accept feedback with gratitude." I started doubting myself, analyzing every email, every tone, every pause during meetings, because any sign of emotion could be used as evidence of instability. He masterfully created situations where I looked bad. He could change project priorities the day before deadline, then on the group call ask why we weren't ready for the original date. If I reminded him of his own changes, he said a true leader adapts without excuses. If I stayed silent, the team saw responsibility fall on me. He could publicly praise one of my employees for an idea we had discussed a week earlier, adding he was glad to see initiative from below, as though I hadn't been involved at all. Gradually, colleagues from other departments began treating me differently, with caution, slight wariness, as if rumors about my issues had reached them. I felt my reputation dissolving without any direct accusations, just through hints and half-tones. The most painful part was how correct everything looked on the surface. No shouting, no overt insults, only careful remarks about areas for growth and potential risks. It was intellectual bullying, constructed so the target starts doubting their own sanity. I tried to keep control, began documenting every change, saving emails, noting dates and exact wording, hoping that if things escalated, I would have evidence. But the more I documented, the more I felt I was living in permanent defense mode. I stopped sleeping properly because I kept replaying scenarios in my head, imagining being called to the senior VP and told the company had lost confidence in me. I started snapping at home, something I used to keep separate from work. And that scared me more than anything because I saw professional humiliation eating into everything else. Then he made the next move. During the quarterly all-hands, he publicly announced my department would undergo an efficiency audit because of too many signals of instability. I learned about it at the same time as everyone else. I stood listening to his calm voice, Understanding this was preparation for an official conclusion of my incompetence. An audit meant process checks, employee surveys, communication analysis. It was perfect cover to gather formal grounds for demotion or termination. I began losing hope because every step I took seemed anticipated and turned against me. Initiative equals compensating for weakness. Caution equals lack of leadership. Even silence became suspicious. I felt humiliated because I was slowly being turned into the problem, into someone who needed fixing. The worst part was that others started believing this version, because it came from someone with power. By the end of this phase, I no longer thought about career growth or recognition. I thought about how not to lose everything at once. I started looking at other jobs, but knew a bad reference from him could close doors. I felt trapped in a system where he had resources, connections, information control, and I had only my fading inner confidence. At one point, I caught myself believing his version of me, that I really wasn't good enough, that maybe he was right, and I just couldn't handle the level. That was rock bottom, because when the person crushing you starts shaping how you see yourself, you lose more than a job. You lose yourself. And right at that low point, when hope was almost gone, I first understood. If I keep reacting instead of acting, they will destroy me completely, professionally and psychologically. The turning point didn't come because I suddenly became stronger. It came because a crack appeared in the system squeezing me, and the crack came from where I least expected it. One of my former team members, someone who had left a month earlier citing a better opportunity, reached out cautiously. I had seen his departure as another sign the team was unstable, maybe proof I really had failed somewhere. He messaged me privately, suggested a call, said there were things I should know. Something in his tone made me agree without hesitation. During the call, he spoke calmly, factually, no excuses, no seeking sympathy, and that made his words hit harder. He explained that before leaving, he had been called in by my boss several times and gently nudged toward the idea that the department needed stronger leadership, that I was too soft, that the company was considering restructuring. They asked leading questions about my management style, my reactions under stress, my communication in tough situations, and every answer got recorded as part of the bigger picture. He admitted feeling pressure, understanding his words could affect his future, so he stayed neutral, but later saw those neutral comments turned into official doubts about leadership stability. The most important thing he said wasn't about my style, it was about the plan from above. According to him, even before the audit, discussion had already started about merging my department with another direction led by someone my boss had long been promoting as his protégé. Formally, it was optimization, but in reality it would reduce or eliminate my role, turning it nominal. The audit wasn't assessment, it was groundwork for a decision already made. Suddenly, many things clicked. Why my successes were dismissed as flukes, why small errors became systemic problems. He also said that in meetings I wasn't invited to, my boss referred to me as acting manager, creating the impression the company was already looking for alternatives. Reputation work had been going on for a long time, systematically. I just hadn't seen the full picture. I felt rage and strange relief at the same time, because for the first time in ages, someone confirmed my perceptions weren't paranoia. It hurt, but it gave me back control. When you see the structure of the game, you stop being a random piece. After that conversation, I re-examined recent months from a new angle. I saw the coaching and HR support weren't care. They were ways to lock in the narrative of my inadequacy. I realized my sharp responses to provocations might have been deliberately triggered to build a file. Most importantly, I stopped asking whether I was good enough because it became clear the goal wasn't improving my performance. It was removing me. That didn't bring peace, but it removed the shame I had carried inside. I started acting differently. Instead of justifying and proving loyalty, I began building a careful defense. I requested the official audit criteria in writing, asked clarifying questions in group meetings so they'd be minuted, sent meeting summaries clearly stating agreements. I stopped discussing strategy verbally without follow-up emails. It wasn't aggression. It was cold systematism. I felt something changing inside me. The naive belief in fair play was disappearing. But the real transformation happened when I realized I held information that could shift the balance. While documenting, I discovered inconsistencies in reporting for one of his flagship projects, the one he actively presented as his success. The numbers had discrepancies that at first glance looked technical, but on close analysis showed forecasts had been deliberately inflated before the board presentation. I hadn't been hunting for dirt. I stumbled on it. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt not fear, but power. I understood I no longer had to play the cornered manager hoping for justice from above. I had facts, I had witnesses, I had the full systemic picture. Most importantly, the desire to merely survive vanished. In its place came the desire to restore balance, not from revenge, but from self-respect. I stopped seeing myself as a victim, because victims react. They don't analyze strategy. I started calculating moves. By the end of this phase, I no longer waited for the audit result in paralyzing fear. I waited for it as the moment I could ask my questions. I knew the risk was still huge. One misstep and I'd be gone for attempting to undermine trust. But internally, I no longer felt broken. I felt the game had moved to a level where calculation, not emotion, decides. And in that moment, I fully stopped being the person who just endures pressure. Because once you see the hidden architecture of betrayal, you either leave or start rebuilding it for yourself. After I saw the full picture and understood my displacement was not accidental, but a pre-planned operation, the desire to save relations or reputation through loyalty disappeared completely. Only cold calculation remained. I stopped trying to please, stopped softening edges, stopped seeking approval. I began preparing for the counterstrike as systematically as he had prepared his. I kept documenting, but now with a different purpose. I carefully collected all versions of reports for his key project, matched presentation dates with actual results, recorded changes to forecasts and emails where he instructed to adjust numbers for stronger external perception. Those phrases didn't sound like direct orders to falsify, but in context, the chain clearly showed an inflated picture presented to the board. I understood this material was dangerous. Sending it straight to HR would get me accused of deflecting blame. I needed the right moment. The audit of my department continued in parallel. I was called to meetings, asked about management style, conflict situations, reactions to pressure. I answered calmly, without defensiveness, with concrete examples and numbers. They expected emotion, justification, irritation. They got none. I no longer defended, I recorded. And when the final audit discussion arrived, with HR, my boss, and a higher-level director present, I knew this was the point I had prepared for. He began with the usual rhetoric about growth areas and potential risks, carefully leading to the conclusion that the department needed stronger strategic oversight. That phrasing meant one thing: my effective demotion. When he finished, they gave me the floor. Instead of arguing point by point, I calmly asked to minute a clarification about the evaluation criteria, because according to approved metrics, my department had over-delivered on key indicators. I pulled up previously agreed tables on screen and asked on what new criteria the conclusion about leadership inadequacy was now based. The room grew tense. He tried shifting to qualitative factors, but I politely reminded him of the strategic project he recently presented as his success and asked a clarifying question about discrepancies between forecasts and actuals. I didn't accuse. I inquired. I referenced specific emails and file versions. I showed adjustments made after internal deadlines and that the board received a different version than working reports. I spoke calmly, emotionlessly, but every word landed precisely. I saw the atmosphere shift. The director, previously silent, began directing questions at him. HR stopped looking only at me. Most importantly, fear left me. Because now the conversation wasn't about my character. It was about numbers and transparency. He tried explaining discrepancies as strategic assumptions and optimistic scenarios. But documents showed internal risk warnings had been ignored before external presentation. I didn't shout or demand justice. I simply laid facts on the table and said that since my department was being audited for process transparency, it would be appropriate to apply the same standards to all departmental strategic initiatives. That was it. I never said manipulation. I never said falsification. I let the system draw its own conclusions. A week later, it wasn't my audit anymore. It was his project under review. Formally, my demotion wasn't immediately canceled, but the process was frozen. Corridor talk began about numbers on his initiative not adding up. He became noticeably more cautious in meetings, stopped publicly commenting on my management style. Pressure didn't vanish completely, but it changed direction. The most important change happened inside me. I understood revenge isn't a flash of rage or total destruction. Revenge is refusing to let yourself be used as disposable material. I didn't ruin his career in one blow, but I stripped him of narrative monopoly. I showed I could play at the same level of systematism he did. It was all or nothing, because if my calculations had been wrong, I'd have been removed for attempting to undermine trust. But I could no longer live under slow erasure. And when the situation shifted, I felt not triumph, but strange calm. I stopped being the cornered manager accused of emotionality. I became someone who understands the rules and isn't afraid to use them. In that moment, I fully left the victim role, even if externally nothing was fully decided yet. The ending wasn't loud. No dramatic firing, no public exposé, no apology scene. Everything happened slowly, formally. His project review ended with report corrections and an internal warning for insufficient forecasting transparency. The wording was soft, but enough to weaken his influence. The board froze expansion of his initiative. Months later, he was transferred to another region to strengthen strategic direction. It looked like rotation. Everyone understood it was a quiet demotion. I wasn't made a hero. No apology came. Full previous status didn't return immediately, but my department audit closed without disciplinary action. The official summary dryly stated, "Stable operational efficiency with need for leadership competency development." Corporate speak for no evidence of incompetence. My direction remained independent. Some authority returned. Most importantly, the constant bullying atmosphere disappeared. I didn't feel victory. I felt exhaustion. 2 years of systematic pressure changed me more than any promotion ever could. I became more cautious, colder, more attentive to wording. I stopped believing good results alone protect you. I understood that in corporate life, truth matters only when documented and backed by strategy. That knowledge cost me sleep, confidence, and some of my naivety. Later, some employees approached me, said they noticed the pressure but didn't want to get involved. Some admitted they feared for their own positions. I don't judge them. I know how the system works when someone with power and reputation stands above you. I stayed silent too at the beginning when I saw the first warning signs. And perhaps the ugliest truth of this story is, corporate betrayal is rarely a solo act. It feeds on silence, caution, and people's desire to protect their own place. 6 months after his transfer, I was offered a promotion. It looked like a logical step after stabilizing metrics. I declined, not from pride or fear. I simply realized I no longer wanted to build a career inside a system where such games are considered normal. I started looking outside, calmly, without panic or feeling like I was running away. When I received an offer from another company, I left quietly. No scandals, no statements. Sometimes people ask whether I regret going all the way and triggering review of his project. Was it justice or revenge? I thought about it for a long time. Formally, I acted within the rules. I didn't fabricate data, spread rumors, or attack publicly. I simply used facts. But deep down, I know it wasn't only self-defense driving me. There was anger, there was humiliation, there was desire to restore balance. And here lies the moral dilemma that still has no clear answer for me. If someone systematically tries to destroy your career and you find a way to weaken their position, is that defense or revenge? If you wait for the right moment to strike back, are you preserving dignity or sinking to their level? I didn't destroy his life. He kept working. Maybe he even drew conclusions. But I consciously used his vulnerability when it served me. Life after this betrayal didn't automatically become easier. I started trusting documents more than words. I became more selective about who I share plans with. I understood professional environments can be as brutal as personal conflicts. And the hardest realization, I discovered in myself the capacity for cold calculation, strategic strikes, things I once considered alien. Sometimes I think, if he hadn't launched this campaign against me, I might have stayed the softer, more naive manager who believes honest work always wins. Maybe I'd be calmer, maybe less cynical, but then I would never have discovered what I'm capable of under pressure. This story isn't about triumph. It's about boundaries, about the moment when patience turns into self-destruction and a person decides to stop it at any cost, even if the cost is losing some of their own softness. I saved my career. I saved my reputation. But I'm no longer the person who walked into that company believing in transparent rules. And if today I had to choose again, endure and hope for justice, or go all the way, risking becoming someone who delivers the counterblow, I still don't know which choice makes a person better. Because sometimes survival demands hardness, and hardness quietly changes you more than any defeat ever could.